Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. I'm doing a military blunders video on Napoleon's Russian invasion. Those of you who haven't heard, who don't know what this is, you're gonna. This is a case in point in, I don't know, logistics or, well, let me just start at the beginning. In June of 1812, the French General Napoleon invaded Russia with some 600,000 soldiers. 600,000 soldiers. His idea was to defeat the Russian army in a decisive battle and then dictate the terms for peace which would force Russian concessions. So his goal was political, but I don't think he thought it through real well. At any rate, Napoleon knew that he couldn't advance an army of 600,000 on a 500-mile march without significant supply lines. With that in mind, he created an enormous supply train to follow his troops. Even this massive logistical support would prove to be inadequate. Napoleon advanced from the Duchy of Warsaw into Russia. Instead of engaging his army, the Russians adopted a strategy of retreat in depth. They retreated and destroyed any crops and other supplies which may be useful to the enemy. This stretched the French supply lines to the breaking point. I want to say it's the term they use now is scorched earth, but what it is you retreat and give ground, but don't give the enemy anything to use. Eventually, his supply lines get so long that he's stymied. He can't do anything else. You eliminate him through logistics. Now, they did the same thing with the Germans in World War II, because the greatest ally, and you're going to see this here in a minute, the greatest ally the Russians have ever had is the Russian winter. Nobody has been able to get past that bad boy. Okay? By the time Napoleon's army reached Smolensk, they'd lost at least 90,000 men through disease and starvation. Russian and French forces finally clashed at Borodino on September 7th. The French scored a narrow victory which cost them another 30,000 men. The Russians continued to retreat. On 14 September, the French army took Moscow, which had been deserted and burned, to eliminate shelter and food sources. By 19 October, the French army had lost more than 500,000 men. He started out with 600,000. He's lost over 500,000 now. With no sign of Russian capitulation, the French were forced to retreat. Now here's where it gets vicious. The retreat from Moscow was an unimaginable horror. Starving soldiers ate anything they could find, including rats, crows, and their own horses. Many resorted to cannibalism. The Russian winter froze thousands, and the Cossack Russians harried the French on a daily basis, spreading fear and death. The attempt to cross the frozen Berezina River alone cost 13,000 French lives. So the retreat was worse than the attack. Napoleon, what this boiled down to is Napoleon was a victim of his own hubris. His overconfidence kept him from realizing what was happening. The initial incursion was well thought out and planned, but once it was realized that the Russians were drawing him in, he should have known that such long supply lines would be untenable. Once the French reached Smolensk, and he lost almost one sixth of his force to starvation and disease, he should have retreated, or at least stopped there. You stop there, you set up a defensive perimeter while you can still supply your troops. You see what I'm saying? You have a chance at supplying troops. If you can't hold that, you retreat. But his hubris, he was overconfident, and his hubris made him continue. And as I understand it, something like 20,000 men of his men survived that debacle. Started out with 600,000 and ended up at 20,000. If I remember correctly, that was the numbers. Now, that being said, nobody has successfully invaded Russia. The only time Russia's been defeated per se was when internal forces changed governments, things like that, internal coups. What do you call it? Rebellions and uprisings, that kind of thing. As far as I know, nobody's ever defeated Russia in a war. And the reason being is once they get started fighting in Russia in the winter, they figure out that, gee, it's cold, we should get the hell out of here. And unless you're at Stalingrad, I did a video on that, check it out, in which case the guys were like, well, we want to leave, and the leader was like, no, stay, because he was given bad information. He was told by one of his guys that the Air Force could supply them, and that didn't happen. In this particular instance, Napoleon should have seen what was going on when they hit Smolensk, and he didn't, because he was so assured of his own greatness. His hubris killed all those men. That's what it boils down to. So keep in mind, if you're playing a game or trying to wage a war, and I don't know why you would be waging a war, but my point is, in wartime, you have to look past your own misconceptions. Napoleon thought he could do anything, and he was wrong. All right, well, I hope this finds everybody well. You folks have a good day. God bless one and all.